and the dockets. I will see that there are dockets placed at the library and perhaps the senior center to try and get as much information before the FTR out there concerning the numbers. So if no one has any questions on that, we'll start with Mr. Perry on the budget proposal.
Before we get started, there's some people I'd like to thank who put a lot of time and effort into this budget proposal. Ms. Charette, who's not here right now, and Nancy Mello did a lot of work putting this budget proposal together, along with the school committee, who did an awesome job coming in with their proposals. And the town council, I have to really extend my tremendous gratitude for what they did. They went through this budget proposal line item by line item, week after week, Saturday mornings, which a few of those I sat in on, and I think I just went to get the muffins from Mrs. Pelletier, but they did sit there from 8 until 1 or 8 until 2 some days on Saturdays going over this proposal. And I'd like to thank the Budget Committee for a lot of hard work that they did putting this budget together. It's not an easy process. It starts way back in October. We sat down with the school committee and the town council, and then we had another meeting with them in December, just to find out what the hot buttons were going to be, if there were going to be any. And then we started our process in January, and we met every Thursday from January until April. So I want to thank all of the people that are on the budget committee and who unanimously proposed this budget. And those people were Joe Bento, Alex Cody, Donna Edwards, Josh Mello, next to me, Joanne Ruda, Laura Epke, Jim Amarantes, Madeline Odell, and Joe Souza, and Chris Carter, and myself. So it was a unanimous vote, and I think that was a great job that we did also. Getting into the budget, page 1, and I'm going to do a little bit of the reading. I have to apologize, I have an eye infection, and if I read too much right now, it gets kind of blurry, so Miss Epke is going to be doing a lot of it. It's not catchy, so no one up here has to be nervous.
Thank you for that. Now you tell me.
And my medication's in my pocket. So page 1, and it says Tiverton Financial Town Referendum, May 20, 2014, Budget Committee Ballot Submissions.
Page 1 of your...
Page 1 of your proposal. Proposal for appropriations and tax levies. The town shall appropriate a sum of $29,275,439 for school department general operating and capital expenditures, and appropriate a sum of $18,617,212 for municipal operations and capital expenditures, and levy a property tax not to exceed $38,125,600, which is an increase to the prior year's certified net tax levy of 1.6%, and includes a motor vehicle tax levy not to exceed $1,440,000 and a real intangible property tax levy not to exceed $36,685,600, as recommended by the Budget Committee. And then we go into the resolves. Resolve number 1, that the expenditures in a revenue budget, both itemized by account, that support the proposal for appropriations and tax levies which receive a majority of vote cast by the electors of the financial town referendum shall be adopted as a Tiverton General Fund budget for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2015. Resolve number 2, that all municipal capital accounts be restricted for an intended purpose and that no transfers are authorized out of these accounts. Resolve 3, resolve that the electors, as this financial town referendum, appropriate a sum for the municipal operation and capital expenses that include an amount to fund the revaluation account. Said amount shall be placed in a restricted revaluation reserve account to be used solely for the purpose of funding property revaluations. And resolve 4, that the unencumbered funds at the end of any fiscal year with the exception of Public Works Department operations, funds that will be permitted to be used solely for future paving, and said funds will be returned to the general fund.
Can I just,
Now,
just point out that the proposal for appropriations and tax levies is what you're going to be voting on the ballot, as well as the 4 resolutions, and they'll be identified as coming from the Budget Committee. And the Budget Committee hopes that you vote for ours.
okay,
You
Laura,
really
want-
need to speak right into the microphone. Is anybody having a hard time hearing them? Okay, you really need to speak right into it and speak loudly, please.
Take it.
Okay, then. Hi, Dave.
We'll get cozy.
Yeah, on page 2 is the local taxation summary. It's very similar to years before. What it does is walk you through step by step how we come up with the tax levy and an estimated tax rate. The tax levy is what you'll be, that's included on the proposal. The tax rate we estimate, because that's not finalized until the tax assessor finishes all his due diligence after the financial town referendum. So you can see by step 1, what that does is the total expenses as recommended by the Budget Committee, less the revenues that we're anticipating that are non-property tax revenues. And you subtract those revenues from the expenses, and that number is what's required to be raised by taxation, and that's the total tax levy. And then from that total tax levy, you subtract out what you're expecting to receive in motor vehicles tax levy, total tax dollars, and that leaves the real property, intangible property tax levy, which then is divided by the total assessed value of the town to come up with your tax rate, which is step 2. Step 3 is new this year. We have run into issues in past years. It's a rounding issue because tax rates are in dollars and cents. If you look on step 2, where it says estimate real and tangible property tax rate, then go down the 1, 2, 3 lines down where it says equals estimated real and tangible property tax rate, you'll see that in the second column there, which is for next year's budget, you'll see that it's $19.6185. Well, you can't have 6185 cents. It has to be 62 cents. And when you use the 62 cents with the total assessed value of the town, it's complicated, but you have to then refigure the levy based on the 62 cents for the tax rate, which is what's accomplished in step 3. Is that clear at all? Yes? Okay. Oh, I forgot the good part, that you can see over on the third column there, the percentage increases year over year, and you'll see that the tax rate is estimated down where it's $19.62. If the Budget Committee's proposal passes, the estimated increase in your tax rate will be 1.29%.
Okay. On page 3, general fund expense budgets, and we have the school department total school appropriation for $29,275,439. The debt service as a total came to $3,490,772, which was a 3.81% decrease from previous year. And
The reason for that is because our treasurer was able to refinance the TIF sewer bond at a much lower rate. So we should all be very grateful to our treasurer for saving us that amount of money.
Page 4, we have municipal capital. And what we have this year is we're going to resurface the town farm, the lower soccer field, for $12,000. That's new. New monitors and defibrillators for the fire department, $25,000. I'm sorry, air packs. Air packs and air bottles, I'm sorry. I told you I was a little blurry. Planning code enforcement plotter for $8,000. And police vehicles, 2 of them, for $60,000. We are going to get a maintenance vehicle for $12,500 and a DPW utility truck for $45,000 for a total of $162,500. The reoccur and major time finance payments. These are on items that we've already purchased, and as you can see, in number 1, the Fire Department Rescue 2, North Tiverton Station, it's the 3rd payment of 5, and that's for $49,000. And you can go all the way down. The ladder truck, again, did not make it this year. But we did add a new 6-wheel truck with plow and sander for $43,182. We looked at the DPW department, and over this past winter, which was a really tough winter, we lost 2 trucks. The roads in town are not that great, we all know that, and it does a number on the trucks that are out there. Page 5. Town Clerk's Office, $264,317 for a bottom line, $12,000 increase. The Town Council, and I'm just going to go through these rather quickly. If you have any questions, you can ask us later on, I guess. Town Council was $77,800 for a decrease of $14,000, and I'm just rounding them off. Town Administrator, $168,052, increase of $8,007. Page 6, Board of Canvassers, $38,100, and that's an increase of $15,500. And again, that's because of, I'll give you a quick one on that one. We have 2 elections, the elections this year, so it's going to add a little bit more money. The Town Hall operating expense is 0. It's level funded. Legal services, $278,500, and that's an increase of $20,000. Municipal court, $26,058, a minimal increase. Probate court, $10,008, and that stood equal. Code enforcement, $119,947, increase of $11,228. Planning department, $66,339, slight increase of $2,000. Planning board, $41,000, increase of $11,200. Zoning board of review, $4,000, that's a decrease of $1,000. Economic Development Commission, $7,500, slight increase of $1,000. The town sergeant stood the same. Financial town referendum stood the same at $12,500. The grand total of general government, $1,141,613, for a slight increase of $69,176. Page 9, the tax assessor, $154,361, increase of $3,000. Revaluations, $53,000, and that's a set aside. It's actually in the resolve.
Yes, if that resolve number,
3. Resolve number 3. Yep.
yes, so if resolve number 3 is approved, what the monies tied to revaluation will be set aside in a restricted account. So that resolve has to be approved in order for those monies to be set to a restricted account.
The treasurer, 108,299, it's a negative 1,500. Tax collector, 117,254, a $500 decrease. Tax sales stood the same at 3,000. The insurance, we saw a big decrease here, 3,393, a savings of 178,000. Audit town accounts, 26,000, a $2,000 increase. The pension plan, savings of $25,000, 800,000. So total operating municipal pensions came to 476,491, an increase of 122,185, and a total pension plan of 1,276,491 is an increase of 97,185. Social Security, 508,333, a slight increase of 17,000. Unemployment security, 10,000, it's a $5,000 increase. Unfunded liability, sick and vacation, 85,000, a slight decrease of 1,700. Budget committee was even at 250. So grand total financial administration, 4,826,988 for an increase of 16,781. Page 11, fire department. We have 2,253,541 for the salary account. It's a decrease of $5,017. Their operating expense, operating total is $360,250, a decrease of $10,000. And their fire department total, $2,613,781 for a decrease of $15,352. Police salaries, $2,614,538, increase of $71,000. General contracted mandated expense total, $136,100 for an increase of $3,700. Operations, $222 for a decrease of $4,250. The animal control officer, $71,016 for a decrease of $5,000. And the total of police department, $3,043,654, an increase of $62,000. Page 14, harbor and coastal management, $2,900. Harbor master, $21,400, an increase of $3,600. Streetlights, $155, an increase of $5,000. Hydrant stood the same at $1,500. The grand total protection to personal and property, $5,838,255. Total of $59,979. Page 15. Grants and health, library services, $490,851, an increase of $28,814. Health and Human Services, $15,000, and it's $500 plus. Agricultural Conservation Services, $1,700, stood even. Wildlife Rehab stood even. Grants and health total, $507,751 for an increase of $29,314. Page 16. Public Works, $591,389, increase of $43,340. Operation totals, $639,950 for a total of $125,750. Department salaries and operation totals is $1,228,839 for a total of $169,090 plus. Stormwater management, $25,000 with an increase of $18,000. Page 17, on-site wastewater management, $20,000, stood even. Rubbish recycling collection, $606, an increase of $10,000. Landfill operations, $220,755, increase of $21,000. And Public Works total, $2,192,258 for an increase of $196,218. Page 18, town committees, 14,400, an increase of 3,000. And senior center services, 110,430 for an increase of 5,800. Total associated activities, 124,830 for an increase of 8,900. Parks and Recreation, beach expenses, 39,000, stood even. Summer recreation, 27,000, that was a decrease of 5,000. Winter recreation went up $25, 900. Maintenance, supplies, and mowing, 40,963, increase of 3,500. Red Cross swimming program, 2425 was even. Recreation coordinator, 8550, stood even. So grand total for Parks and Recreation, 119,738, a decrease of 1,675. School resource officer, 50,400, and that stood even. And that's an offset in the budget from the school committee. So total school expenses, 29,275,439, an increase of 546,014. Total municipal expenses, 18,617,212. Total of 197,732. And the grand total general fund expenses, 47,892,651, for a total of 743,346. State funding source on page 20. Total from the state. You want to take that one?
Well, I'll just say that these are the revenues.
These are actually revenues. The other ones were not. This is money coming in, not going out. State revenue source, 7,217,960, and that's actually an increase of 107,261. Local funding sources, non-property tax, and that runs all the way from page 20 to 21 to 22 for 2,601,930 for an increase of 28,290. The general fund surplus withdrawal, total from local sources, non-property tax, 2,601,930 is 28,290. Total state and local source, non-property tax, 9,819,890 for an increase of 135,551. The total tax levy, 38,122,761, would be an increase of 602,395. And uncollectibles at 50,000 instead of 55, so it's a $5,000 increase. Total property tax receipts, 38,072,761 for a total of 607,795. And the grand total, the general fund reserve, 47,892,651 for a grand total of 743,246.
Can I just make a note that this is the total of the general fund revenues that we're expecting, 47,892,651. If you go back to page 19, you'll see that the bottom line expenses, 47,892,651. So your expenses equal your revenues. There's two pieces to the budget. One is the expenses, one is the revenues, and they have to be balanced for a town.
Take one.
Sure. So if you vote and approve resolution, Budget Committee Resolution Number 1, the expenses and revenues that Mr. Perry just walked you through will become the general fund budget for the next fiscal year. The next page, I-1, these are informational pages that we've added. This one is a summary, summarizes the revenues. And just as Mr. Perry said, you can see the state funding sources, unrestricted aid, education, and aid to cities and towns, which we've received this year because we have followed through on the corrective action plan for the police pension fund. So this year, we're receiving $74,510. State funding sources reimbursements, the school housing aid, that's the reimbursement for the school bonds from the state, and the public service corp tax, meals and beverage, and motor vehicle tax exemption are reimbursements from the state, and they have a specific purpose. And then the local funding sources, we summarize them, we put them into buckets so that we can compare them year over year. Difference this year is that we no longer really have any students from Fall River attending. They are soon to be gone. So we don't expect any reimbursements from Fall River for tuitions. There's a little bit of an increase in the miscellaneous departmental fees. Those are all the dog license, restaurant licenses, yada, yada, yada. You'll see that the Budget Committee is not recommending withdrawing any money from the general fund. That's why you see those zeros. And then you get a total from local sources. That's the $2,601,930. And then you add that to the anticipated state sources of $7,217,960 up from the top, and you come up with our total expected revenue from non-property tax, which is $9,819,890. And as I mentioned on the property tax, on the tax summary page, that number is a magic number. You take that away from your estimated expenses, subtract it from your estimated expenses, and deal with the motor vehicle tax levy, and that's how you come up with a real property and tangible tax levy, which is your, divided by the total assessed value of the town, is your property tax rate. What's on the next page? Oh! So you had a summary of the revenues, now we have a summary of the expenses, the whole town expenses, year over year, total school appropriation. You can see the increase was 1.9%. Debt service, there you see that reduction of 3.8% due to the TIF bond. What is the word? Thank you. And then the totals for the different large categories in the budget: capital, general government, financial administration, etc., down to the bottom. If you look over just on the right-hand side in that column, you'll see the school operating expenses increased by 1.9%, debt was down 3.8%, total municipal was up 1.1%, and bottom line, everything all together, expenses were up 1.6%.
You also notice, like Laura said before, if you look at 1.1 and 1.2, it's I1 and I2, I'm sorry, 47,892,651 and 47,892,651, which is a balanced budget.
Page I3 is a summary of the school budget. Goes through their operating by different categories, different operating categories. There are just 2 capital expenditures for the schools that are included within the school budget. That's the high school and the middle school intercom that we're almost done paying for, and the high school bleachers. What the school has been doing for the past few years is using their reserve funds to pay for one-time capital expenses. And you can see those on the bottom of the page under the dotted line on the left-hand side. If you compare it to last year's summary page, you'll see this accounts for what they said they were going to do last year, and yes, in fact, they did it. And this is what they're planning or proposing. It's not been approved by, or maybe it has, at this point. This is what the school committee is planning on using those reserve dollars for. Okay, page I4 starts the municipal expense budget summary. This goes by the different expense categories within the municipal side of the expenses. So you can look across, for example, on page I-4, under the general government, you can look, it's the bottom line for the town clerk's office, year over year, you can see the percent changes. And that goes through the entire municipal expense budget. And if you turn back to page I-7, this walks you through, it ties out to the audit in the first box for the general fund reserves. That if you compare from the audit, the total fund balance was $3,996,980. You take that total fund balance, reduce it by the amount that's restricted for school use, which they're planning to use for capital, which is $1.472 million. And then you take away from that the amount that's committed for municipal use, and that would be some rollover DPW funds, which are not huge, and I'm losing my word.
Unassigned general fund.
No. No, the other, no, prepaids. Well, there are monies that are committed from this fiscal year.
Encumbered.
Thank you, encumbered. If you take the school restricted dollars and the municipal dollars away from the total general fund dollars, then you have the unrestricted general fund balance, which is $2,237,646. The Budget Committee's recommended expense budget is $47,892,651. 3% of that is what is required to be kept in the general fund balance by the charter. The current council policy is to use 3.5%, so we've used 3.5%. So the amount to reserve is $1,676,243. Take that away from the unassigned general fund balance, and there's an additional $1,676,240. No, less amount to reserve leaves you $561,403. And the Budget Committee decided that we did not want to take any money out of the general fund this year. The next box walks you through the maximum tax levy, which is where we check to make sure that we haven't reached the 4% cap limit, which we haven't, we're not even close. And then the bottom box, impact of additions to expense budget. This walks you through what happens if you add $100,000 to the budget, or decrease it by $100,000. And finally, the last two pages, I-8 and I-9. This is a summary of the last 10 years. This is budget. This is not actual numbers. These are budgets. So you can compare budgets year over year and projections. The first box is actual dollars. The second line there is percent of total, so you can look and see over the course of the past 10 years. In fiscal year 2004, the school was 64.7% of the budget. At last year's budget, it was 60.9. So their budget has gone down as a percent of the overall. Debt service has gone up as a percent of the overall budget. On page I-9, the first box is a year-over-year dollar change, so you can see from year to year how each category has gone up or down. And then the last box gives you a year-over-year percent change. And I would just take this opportunity to point out to you how I use this and how I find it helpful. If you look on page I-8, and go down to fiscal year 2009. That was the financial town meeting. This is the budget that was approved at the financial town meeting of 2008. If you go across, you can see the budget that was approved at that year. And if you go, you'll see that there were $0 taken out of the general fund for that year. If you go to page I-9, and look at the change from '08 to '09, you'll see that at that financial town meeting in May of 2008, the debt service was increased by $1 million. The school was up by 560, municipal was up by 117. So we significantly increased expenses. If you go over to the revenues, you'll see there's a big negative $900,000 there from general fund surplus withdrawals. Because the year prior, we pulled out $900,000 from the general fund to offset taxes. And then this year, there wasn't anything left to take out. So we were down $900,000. We had a hole of $900,000 that we didn't, sell the industrial park to fill. There was no $900,000 coming in to fill that hole. If you go down to the next box and you find that same line, 0809, and you go all the way across, you'll see that tax levy increase was 11.2%. So not only did we have new debt come on the books, we also had a hole of $900,000, and that's why the taxes went up 11%. So I take this opportunity to show that to you because I think it's particularly relevant this year. Enough said.
You all set, Mr. Perry?
All set.
Okay. So, Mr. Roderick, you will present the council resolution.
Again, I want to thank the town council, the budget committee, and especially Mrs. Mello. This particular budget, for those who worked on it, we spent many, many hours between us and the budget committee. We may not have agreed on everything, but what we did agree on was to do what was in the best interest of all the people of the town of Tiverton. I want to point out a few people, especially on the council. I want to thank Denise DeMedeiros for being our eyes and ears at every budget committee, and Brett for running numbers and coming up with new ways to look at things, and my fellow councilors who challenged us on every single number to make sure that we knew exactly what we were looking at and what we were talking about. Because again, our consideration is always to make sure that we maintain the health and safety of the town of Tiverton, and also make sure that we are always keeping in mind to make Tiverton better. And again, I want to thank everyone again personally. Town Council resolution, it's resolution number 5. Resolved that pursuant to Section 204 of the Town Charter, the Town Council is hereby authorized to transfer ownership of the Judson Street Community Center, provided that such transfer is in the best interest of the town of Tiverton.
That's straightforward.
That's it. That's the Town Council resolution.
Okay, I guess that,
Mr. Tax on the petitioner's, elector's petition.
okay, thank you for coming out tonight. I approached the budget a little bit differently. I approached the budget situation a little bit differently. The United States unemployment rate is 6.7%. Rhode Island is the worst in the nation, 8.7%. In Tiverton in March, it was 9.8%. I've looked back in history a little bit. If you look at March of 2001, and then March of 2000 of this year, the number of people who are employed in Tiverton went up by 42 people. The population has only gone up 500, and our household income has been exactly inflation. The town of Tiverton is not growing. And yet, if you chart out all of the budget levies since 2001, you see they have more than doubled. And that doesn't even include pay-as-you-throw, which doubled tax services easily. I don't know how you can ask people for more money. That's the bottom line. Even so, my petition does not cut any spending. It funds everything and even leaves around $200,000 in the, not the reserve fund, the unassigned funds. Partly, I believe that the government should just not be that much healthier than the people it's supposed to be serving. Regarding the unassigned fund, by definition, it's not supposed to have something that it's intended to pay, so we've got this talk about the borrowing costs. If you look at the handout that says general fund balances, there are tables in here that show all of the unassigned and general fund balances for all the towns of Tiverton. What this sheet doesn't show is their latest credit ratings from Moody's. If you look at those, you see there is no direct correlation between these and credit. The treasurer's letter here talks about how Moody's comes up with its ratings. I actually saw today S&P was grading all the states on their improvement since the recession. And one of the things they look at is how much the general fund has grown since 2008. In 2008, Tiverton's general fund was about 400,000. So even after taking out money to stop taxes from going up this year, will still be 4 times that amount. So I guess in summary, my petition would hold the tax levy at about 0 for a total property tax levy not to exceed $37,527,200. They'll hold the real and tangible property tax at $36,087,200. That would actually produce a slight decrease in the tax rate from what it is now, and 32 cents per thousand from what it would be if the Budget Committee's petition passes. As a general point of philosophy, if there is a shortfall and the town does need money next year, we can tax ourselves next year. The credit rating agencies know that. They know that we're having surpluses every year. So to gain this minor improvement in fiscal standing, we're putting almost $1 million unassigned into the general fund. And frankly, I've looked through the charter and state law, and I don't see much protection for anything except that 3% that we're required by our own charter to have. I guess that sums up my points. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, so everyone has completed the presentation here. For anyone that wants to ask some questions, I ask that you please line up on this side. Everybody's going to have a chance. Nobody's going to leave till all the questions are answered. And please restrict your questions to a 5-minute time so everybody has a chance that wants to ask. And if you see someone come up that has not had a chance and you are on a multiple time up here, please let them get before you so that we can make sure everyone has had a chance to be heard. Please direct your questions to Mr. Katz or to Dave Perry of the Budget Committee, unless you have a question on the resolve, and that would be fine for Mr. Roderick. But if you have a question on any portion of the municipal budget, the Budget Committee will direct it to the person if they are not able to answer it fully to your satisfaction. If you have a question with the school committee, they will do the same, with the school budget, I'm sorry. They will do the same and direct it through the superintendent or someone from the school department that would be able to answer you to your satisfaction, okay? And please state your name and address when you come so we'll all know who you are.
Okay, and Madam Clerk, I'm going to go down because I've become a regular citizen, so I can ask questions.
Does anybody have a question on the resolution? Because we don't need to hold the councilors or Mr. Wojcik up here if you do not have any questions on the resolution. Okay, Mr. Wojcik, that's up to you. But he's going to go right up to the microphone, and please remember that microphone's a little shaky. And I know you're tall, Mr. So, I don't know if I put this
Mrs.
on
Mello,
the floor, would it help?
I really believe you need a podium next year.
Okay. Actually, there's one there, too.
Is this being picked up?
You have to lean down.
I am not that tall. I'm
have to
6'3".
lean down.
I should be able to have a microphone.
It's my height.
Okay. Okay. Okay, I'm going to try to keep my voice up. This afternoon, I took a look at the documents we were going to review today, and I ended up writing a letter to the editor, and it was a response to a letter to the editor by Mr. Katz, directed both to the Secana Times and the Newport Daily News. And I had a number of questions in that letter that I'd like to direct to Mr. Katz tonight. To the editor, after reading Mr. Katz's letter in support of his FTR petition, an alternative budget for Tiverton, I'm left with a number of questions, and I'll try to address the most obvious. According to Mr. Katz, and I'm quoting, "The bottom line is that the town government wants to keep its hands," unquote, "on all of the money in the unreserved general fund referred to in Section 310 of the Charter." Mr. Katz in his letter does not limit himself to the surplus. And according to Mr. Katz, and I'm quoting, "It is clear that the town officials actually have a number of ideas about what they can use it for," unquote. Mr. Katz, would you identify the officials? Mr. Katz, are they elected? Are they appointed? Would you give us some specifics on just how they plan to use the money? This is more than an idle curiosity. I'm on the town council, and I've never heard any official discuss or even suggest withdrawal from the rainy day fund for any purpose, whether it's good or bad. I don't have any plans for spending the money, and in fact might well support an increase in the unreserved fund. We are also told by Mr. Katz that the town's employees have, quote, "their ideas for the use of the money." Again, however, Mr. Katz, could you be just a little bit more specific? More importantly, would you tell us how these town officials, the town employees, and their unions, as you allege, would actually get access to the money? Although you make no reference to the Charter's requirements, the following provisions apply. And I'm quoting, "No money shall be taken, withdrawn, or obligated from the unreserved general fund if such withdrawal would cause said fund to fall below 3% of the current operating budget. This resolution may be suspended on a case basis by an affirmative vote of 4/5 of the town council in order to address a declared state of emergency as enacted by the town council." That's Section 310. An emergency is defined as follows, and I'm quoting, "A situation wherein the public health, safety, and/or general welfare of the town is immediately imperiled by an unusual or unforeseen circumstance," unquote. Now, if we assume, and this I admit is a far-fetched example, that a town employee asks for a raise, or a union official asks for an increase in benefits during contract negotiations, do you really believe a town council, by a 4/5 vote, would find that to be an emergency as defined by the Charter? Would you also explain how the school committee would have access to the unreserved general fund? Because you do make that allegation. Is it simply enough that they give the appearance, quote, of correcting problems resulting from their poor mismanagement, unquote? Your words, Mr. Katz. And the money is then just simply turned over? Is that how it works? Would repaving the high school parking lot or buying new computers for the students, would that now constitute an emergency in your thinking?
Mr. Lambert,
I have-
are you coming to an end?
Yes,
though?
I am.
Okay.
I am. I have no experience taking money from the rainy day fund, but it has always been my understanding that even above the mandatory 3%, the town and the Budget Committee have no right to spend the money. The Budget Committee can recommend, but the final decision on how the money is actually spent is left to the FTR. You also claim in your letter, and I'm quoting, the Budget Committee's numbers concerning the general reserve are, quote, misleading and dishonest. That's nonsense. It did take me a few minutes to figure out what you were referring to. But in your petition you state, and I'm quoting, this petition corrects a misstatement in the docket of the unreserved general fund amount required by Section 310 of the Home Rule Charter, which is 3%, not 3.5%. As you know or should know, the Budget Committee never claimed that 3.5% was the required amount under the Charter, Section 310. The 3.5% refers back to a proposal that was made by Robert Coulter when he was on the town council to increase the reserve for the rainy day fund. It was his position that 3% was insufficient. A resolution was introduced by Mr. Coulter, seconded by Mr. Nelson, and as best I recall, it was adopted unanimously by the town council. While the petition gives yet another
Mr. Lambert, you've
Okay,
got several
I'll be
questions
finishing
there.
shortly. I promise. The problem that we have, Mrs. Mello, is that there are so many
I know,
statements
you
that
might
have
have
to
to
be
do it in a
addressed.
couple of times, but I'm
Well, I
just,
will promise to finish in the next minute or so.
okay, fine.
While the petition gives you another opportunity to continue your repetitive chant that our town officials are incompetent, if not worse, is that really relevant? I would have thought that the only real issue for us is simply stated: what is the appropriate amount of money that should be in our rainy day fund? At a recent town meeting, our auditor told the town council that in today's world, the appropriate unreserved general fund should be in the range of 7 to 9%. A resolution was later passed asking the town treasurer and the town clerk to give their recommendations as to the appropriate reserve and the criteria for use of any of the money. Keep in mind, they are independent elected officials who are not subject to the direction of the town council or the town administrator. If any changes to the charter are suggested, I would assume the town council would then submit the matter to a committee of taxpayers for a proposal that could be submitted to the voters. That's hardly rushing to spend the money. Would you explain, Mr. Katz, for my benefit, why I should now simply accept your claim that we have, to use your language, quote unquote, enough in the reserve? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lambert.
All right, well, just to correct something, Charter Section 310 gives an instruction for taking money out of the reserve only under 3%. In the budget proposed here, you have $800,000 above 3%. So that whole section that you read does not apply. As far as emergencies, they don't have to be, I mean, it also says in there, health of the town, I believe. So say a town employee were filmed misappropriating town resources, and the town administrator admitted on TV that he fired a whistleblower, which is a crime, and then that whistleblower sued the town, leaving us in a big hole. That would be an emergency that you could then go back to the reserves for. Now,
Be nice, but no.
Now, as far as the right to spend, if you look at Charter Section 203, it reads, "Any major or special appropriation other than those which are part of the annual budget for an amount in excess of $500,000 requires town approval." As you know, because y'all bought a gas station for less than $500,000 this year, there are ways around that. Now, excuse me, you can go to the microphone. Aye.
It's okay, I'll control the attendance, and I did tell you, please go to the microphone.
Now, as far as the general fund having a reserve of 7 to 9%, I'd be very happy with that. I think that ought to be in the town charter. My concern is that if we are this far over the 3% that has special protections for the taxpayer, then we're at risk, and that the money does not supply any real benefit to the town by being in just the general fund. I think it supplies more to the town by having a lower tax rate to keep up the tax base. If you look at, again, that the treasurer's letter, Moody's, for example, says that 30% of their credit rating is the tax base, 30% is finances, only 15% of that, or 15% being general fund balances, which could also be, say, the surplus the next year. The audit is done at the end of the year. Management is 20%, and debt and pensions, which we're not doing too hot on, is 20%. So I think our best bet at this point is to let the people of Tiverton keep their money, invest in their houses, invest in their lives, and improve the town the way they see fit, without just having money sitting around for the benefit of Wall Street.
Any other questions? Just go up to the mic. And state your
Ed Roderick,
name.
19 Sparrow Drive. Mr. Katz, I only have one question of you. You say that we'll take this $600,000 this year and keep the tax rate even or level. What will we do next year? You say, just tax the people. So you're already planning and forcing whatever council is in charge to begin with a $600,000 deficit, because we'll have to make up those funds. You know, and then you accused the council, the employees of the town of Tiverton, of mismanagement, of having ideas on the funds. Let me tell you, Mr. Katz, this council, this budget committee, has done more to ensure and protect the finances of this town. And you, with your misguided thoughts, are only going to make bigger problems for this town in the future. So I would suggest, Mr. Katz, that when you talk about increasing the value of your home, I hope you realize what that means. When you increase the value of your home, your taxes go up.
Well, I would start by responding that that's exactly how taxes should go up. I mean, if I had my druthers, we would look at the rate, not the levy, and that way the town would have incentive to make my property worth more, therefore I pay higher taxes. That ought to be how it works, not collecting how much the town thinks it needs and then saying, okay, divvying it up and saying, okay, this is what you owe. I'd also suggest that the absence of an even bigger surplus is not a deficit. If you want to prevent having to increase taxes by a lot next year, the key would be to keep the budget down and to not do things, risk lawsuits or other things that might be an emergency that would drive the budget up by a lot. And I also would point out that there are two ways to change the percentage of your budget that is a reserve. One of them is to tax more and put more money in reserve. The other of them is to decrease the spending, because then see the same amount of money in the reserve is a bigger percentage. That would be my preference. Point of order, are we following Robert's rules?
I'm sorry.
Are we-
I asked, and I beg your
What do you
forgiveness.
do?
I just want to make this one statement.
You're coming back as a second question?
Yes.
Yeah, but everybody
Okay.
should get to speak before he does, according to Robert's rules.
All right. The next
Then
time
I-
you're
I will ask-
speaking,
I-
stay there so
no.
you can hear the answer
I
if
will
you have
acquiesce
anything
to
else to
Robert's
say.
rules, and I will come
Okay.
back.
Mrs. Black? And I would ask that you stay there until you please hear the answer in case you you do have something to ask Deanna.
I don't have so many questions. I do have many questions, but I just have a statement. I think you all know probably that I've been going to the Budget Committee meetings faithfully since 2003. I have never seen such a process as I saw this year. I am so proud of these elected officials who had the pre-budget meeting in October, as was said before, and then met every week, January on, 5 below zero. It didn't matter. We were all there. We were all asking questions. I don't want anybody to think we were holding hands and singing Kumbaya. It gets rough in there. People get upset. Sometimes people take their bag and quit. Then they come back the next night, everything's good. But it's about the town, the whole town. I was made fun of in the paper for saying, 02878, we're all one town. We are one town. We proved it this year. It's the most amazing budget I've seen in any town. I follow it all. I watch all the budget hearings so we can learn. I hear them talking about fund balance, and they're saying, put it to 7, put it to 8, national average is 15. When I look at the list and we're on the bottom, you like to look at lists and put us all on the bottom. We don't want to be there. We all want to rise to the top. We're all working hard in the town and in the schools and in all our departments. You mentioned something about the town council, you mentioned the budget committee, you mentioned words like dishonest, and so you could talk about the gas station. Well, one thing I'm concerned about is that when we turned Ranger School over, it was worth $1 million. It then went down, got boarded up and went down to $800. It was sold for $25,000, and we got 5. The real estate agent got 20. If we want to go back and talk about some things, let's talk about when I got these petitions. There were 9 of them. 9 petitions went out, and I went over the signatures. And I see people that voted for a long-term financial plan a few years ago to go up 0.5 to 5%. And a lot of people were in the paper and in the minutes. Laura Epke, Deb Polish, saying they thought that was a good, prudent thing to do. And as you read in all the papers with Moody's and everything, I didn't agree with that because I think we should go year to year. This year is the best year Tiverton has ever had. So why would we take money out this year when next year the library's bond coming on, perhaps a roof, perhaps a boiler, we don't know. We did our facility study as we said we were going to do. We funded the whole septic, which we put in 4. Some people said it was too high, it was only 2, it came out to be 6. Because we put that money away and were prudent, we didn't have to come to the town. That was health and safety. 3 schools would have closed, we could have come to the town for that one, it would have to be passed. We've all been doing a very good job, and I'm very disappointed that in a year that we're doing so well, someone would ask to take that out. Thank you.
Well, I would say that I do respect the hard work that everybody put into the budget, and I didn't cut anything. I didn't remove anything from the budget. I just took a little bit more from the reserve fund. I didn't change all of that hard work. And I would reiterate that, I mean, you talk about not being at the bottom of the list. Our unemployment rate in Tiverton is 9.8%. That's higher than the 8.7% of the state, which is the highest in the nation. That concerns me a great deal. As far as the people who signed my petition sheets, we had over 100 people signing, with the requirement being 50. So whatever the motivations of any dozen of them, there were plenty others to make up for that. And as far as the reserved fund being low, I would fully support that being increased via the charter. I just am concerned that there are no protections for the taxpayer as that dollar amount exceeds what is explicitly put in the charter as requiring a state of emergency and a 4/5 vote by the council.
Yes, Mr. Katz, thank you. We're very concerned about the unemployment also. The schools are working hard on the skills gaps, working on a state level. We're very aggressive about all these things. So thank you very much.
Anyone else choose to come up?
Hi, Denise DiMaderas, 55 Kevin Drive. Judson, I just want to make it clear that the gas station did not cost this town a cent. It did not come from general fund or any kind of taxation money. Second of all, just to make the numbers clear, the increase that we are proposing, and correct me if I'm wrong, Laura, it's $75 increase a year on a $300,000 house. So on a $200,000 house, it would be $50 a year. That's what we're proposing. My question to you is, what are you proposing for next year? This budget is very tight. I'm glad you think it's a good budget, and it is a very good budget, but it's a tight budget. And I don't see a lot of savings for next year unless something comes up. What are you proposing next year? Because that $75 per $300,000 household has to be paid next year. You're just putting off the increase right now. And whatever comes along next year, such as the bond and other things that might happen, people are going to end up paying the increase next year because that reserve will not be there.
Hold on one second.
You need to stay there.
All right, regarding the gas station, whether or not it costs the town money, I mean, we get a lot of, say, state and federal aid for schools and for the town, which doesn't cost the town money, but it still has to be appropriated. So that amount, no matter where it came from, was appropriated by the town. It was under $500,000, which is why the charter didn't require
But it
any.
did not come out of.
No, I understand that, but by the same token.
It came out of grants.
No, I understand that, but by the same
Open
token,
space
if
grants,
there
it
were
did not
something,
come out of the
if there
town.
were something that the town were going to buy out of, say, the unassigned fund, the point is that if it's under $500,000, the gas station is an illustration that the people don't necessarily get a say. It can be done in executive session.
But you're implying that we took out of that for the gas station, Justin.
No,
We didn't.
I'm implying that the law doesn't offer protection for taxpayers of expenditures that are transferred under $500,000.
That,
Now, regarding the increase, the minimal amount of the increase, I mean, we hear that every year. I mean, when we still had the FTM, I was actually laughed at for saying that you were taking money for my Christmas presents for my children. That $75 is on top of, as I pointed out at the beginning, a doubling of the tax levy since the early last decade. In addition, it's cumulative for the rest of eternity. So that's $75 this year, $75 plus some the next year, up until whenever somebody sells their house.
So what is-
Every year it's a little bit, but it grows and grows and grows, as we've seen in this town.
First of all, it's never been this low. We went back 10 years, and it's never been this low. Second of all, what are you going to do next year? Will there be cuts? Because there'll have to be cuts if you want to make it a 0% next
Well,
year.
we'll see what the circumstances merit next year. Right now,
So you really don't have an answer to what you're going to do next year?
well, we don't know what the budget's going to be next year. We don't know what's going to happen in the economy, in a town, with aid. We're not certain that the budget has to go up every year. I mean, I don't start the year certain that I'm going to have more money the next year either. One of the concerns I have is that when you have this extra money above and beyond what the charter requires, it encourages ideas for spending. It encourages, especially during years where negotiating salaries, contracts, you see this $1 million sitting there in the unassigned fund. You can increase the budget next year with minimal tax increase because that's in there this year. So forward-looking, there's no reason I can see to have that money in the town's accounts rather than the accounts of the people who live in Tiverton.
My only statement to that is, we did not see you at one budget committee meeting. We did not see you at one town council meeting. We did discuss that unreserved fund, and it wasn't to pull out to pay for contracts. It was for a rainy day, in case we needed something. None of us we talked about taking from that fund as you did, but we decided to keep it there. And I really do feel that that fund should be used for one-time items, not to take care of a tax rate, because that's how we got in trouble in future years. Because what I'm telling you is next year, we have never paid us for that money, and that money will not be there. So unless you're willing to do a lot of cuts next year, and I'm not saying there's going to be an increase next year, I'm saying whoever the town council is should go through it just the way we did and try to find savings. But what I'm saying is, this is too good to be true. Okay, because at some point next year, where does that money come from?
Well, with regard to the rainy day fund, there's still going to be $1.6 million in the budget for the general fund for a rainy day fund. That's still there. it would have to be replenished the following year if you use it, but you're saying the same is true of this money. And regarding the money being there in the accounts, if it's not in the general fund account, it'll be in the accounts of the people of Tiverton. I mean, if you could tell me, give me $1 today, and I won't ask you for one tomorrow, I'd rather have the $1 today, be honest with you, especially when so many dollars have been, since the tax rate has doubled, since a lot of people have moved into town in the early 2000s. Excuse me, tax levy has doubled, not tax rate.
Sanford, Mantel, Bud White. The informational page, page I-7, that whole section I really like. The only thing I would suggest going forward, the percent reserve should really be 3%, not 3.5%. That's per the charter. And if you do that, you'll show the actual surplus of 800,000. It's a bit misleading. But to that point, what benefit do we have for this $800,000? How does it benefit the town, say for interest rates on borrowing?
I believe that we haven't gone out for borrowing with Mooney's since the schools.
But
So we
I'm
don't
sorry.
have, we really don't have a rate right now. We don't have
Okay,
it. We're not
how about a
AA,
good
we're
faith
not A.
estimate?
I couldn't give you an estimate on what we are, because we don't have one.
All right, so the point is, you want to keep a surplus of $800,000, no cost benefit, basically.
Well, the cost benefit is,
Well, again, you're making an investment of $800,000. What's the benefit?
what we've done over the last few years is gone by what the resolve was, I believe, a resolution from the council. It was at 3%. Mr. Coulter, Mr. Nelson wanted to increase it to 3.5. So for the last few years, we've been doing that. We've been going with the resolve from the resolution from the council to increase it to 3.5, to keep the money in the general fund in case something happens.
That doesn't answer the benefit question.
Well, I could answer to some degree. I made a similar chart to what they did, what all the towns have in Rhode Island, and compared that to their latest credit ratings. Not all the information's available because not everybody borrows frequently, like we have been doing. But there's no direct correlation. There were towns with like 7-8% of their general reserve put aside, and they had the same credit ratings as towns with, say, 20%. There's no, I mean, a healthy town will have surpluses and good credit, so there's correlation in that
So this
regard.
doesn't benefit our credit rating?
I don't think so. And
Okay.
with regard to your comments on page I-7, if you look back 2 years ago, it does say 3%, and that says that that is the required amount to reserve. If you look last year, they erased the word required from anywhere on there, and it was 3.5%. Now this year, we get the word required back, which is factually incorrect on the 561.
Well, to my point, it's not required to be 3.5%, it's 3%.
Right, exactly.
Can I just jump in here for a minute? Because that is directly, and I would just like to make a statement, because I've heard this gone back and forth several times. If you look at this series of reports, and I'm going to say series of reports because I hate the word docket, how many pages are in here? I think there's probably over 20.
Yep.
You'll have to excuse us if we missed a word. The intent of taking out that required, and I don't see required in here, percent of budget to reserve.
Well, again,
That
fund
was the
balance
budget
above.
committee decision to go with the town council policy.
if I picked up this document, it said to me, the excess over the required is $561,000, period. Misleading.
I'm not seeing it.
It's your document, I-7.
Yeah, equals general fund balance above required reserve.
Where? Oh!
And actually, that word required was added back in this year. It wasn't just missed and not
Well,
taken out
see,
or anything.
if you guys had been at the last budget committee meeting, it wouldn't have made it in there. I would just like to make sure that everyone knows that there's no nefarious motives involved there.
Well, my petition fixes that language as well, so hopefully
And-
next year
Yeah.
And I would also like to ask maybe one of our former treasurers to speak to the 800,000 you asked about the cost benefit of keeping that in the reserve. The intent is to improve the financial health of the town. We are the lowest amount of reserves in the state, from what I understand. I think a treasurer would be better able to speak to the benefits of that, and I'm sorry our treasurer is not here this evening, but maybe one of our former treasurers would like to speak to the benefit of having enough reserves.
They going to cut in my time?
No, they can come after
Okay.
you.
Okay. My back is to the crowd, so I may have some arrows pointed at me. If you're looking at for some cost reductions, I sent a letter to the editor in January, and I went back and did some research, and I'm sure many people aren't aware of it, but to go along with the fact that our population really hasn't been increasing, our school population has been decreasing. And if you go back and look at the average percentage decrease in student population, it ranges between 1 to 1.5% per year over the past 10 to 15 years. So I guess I'm hard put to understand why, aside from contractual obligations, we still see increases in the school budget if you're looking for cost containment. I didn't think so.
Hold on. Wait, we can refer. David, are you going to refer it to?
Department's budget over time, it's because there are costs that we cannot control, such as heating, oil, busing, so on. Just like on the town side, the town budget, the same question could be asked, well, why has the town budget gone up? Because they too have costs that they can't control. We have special ed costs. That's why they've gone up. And our numbers have gone down, as have the number of teachers we've had. Since 2006, we've reduced our staff accordingly. So that's why our numbers have gone up 1% or whatever over the last 10 years.
I'm good. The only thing in summary, again, we have an $800,000 surplus over required, and no one has been able to explain the benefit.
Well, I think we did.
I don't think so. There has to be a financial benefit. If I'm going to pay $800,000, what is my return? Thank you.
My name's Joe Souza, 49 Hancock Street, a member of the Budget Committee. I'm here speaking for myself. Just some observations. I probably attended 19 financial town meetings and have voted pretty much. I think that the financial town referendum has been a success. And Mr. Katz, 0% sounds great. I'd like to vote for it, but I know some things that I know you know. There's that word, unfunded mandates. You know about the pension system in the state. You know that we're seeing increases. You know that this town has a $6 million unfunded police pension, which is solely the responsibility of the town. You know that we have $9 million worth of road work that's needed, about the same amount in school repairs that are needed. I've observed this budget committee start funds for things like revaluation. We started to put money away each year so that when that $300,000 bill comes in every 3 years, every 9 years, it's a little less when it's just statistical. But the point is that we started to put money away each year so that we don't have those big bumps. We all know that when we floated the bonds on the schools, we had that big tax increase. Everybody came out. Everybody was outraged about the tax increase. And as a result, we're paying about $1.3 million in interest. Well, now our schools, I think with a little bit of prodding by a lot of people and a school committee that's stepped up, they're starting to fix the schools annually. They put the septic system in, they use their surplus. And the idea of putting money away to pay for things instead of going out to bond saves this town millions over the years. And what we've tried to do with the budgets that I've seen on this budget committee over the last 4 years is to smooth the increases so that they're small increases. And let's face it, I mean, between stormwater, I'm talking all these state mandates that are being thrown on the town by the legislature that aren't funded, where we're required to go out now and look in storm drains to find sewers that are leaking into the bay. Education, where we're required to do all of these things that, you know, for special aid and everything else, the special needs children, those costs all go up every year. And you know, because you're up at the legislature, that we have no control over a lot of these costs. They just tell us, pay it. So if there's a big jump where you have a couple of students that come in with special needs, you're going to see a large increase. I mean, there was one student, I think, was costing us $100,000 a year for one student. So these costs are unpredictable. You know, I'd like to vote for a 0% increase, but I just know that we're going to go back to that big bump here, and then it'll come down, and then people will be all mad because their taxes went up 4% or 4.5% in 1 year. As I said, what's happened here is we've tried to smooth it out so that we have level, small increases. And the fact is, with the condition of this state, as I explained, and the mandates that are being thrown on us with the pension systems and everything else, the idea that we can go out with a 0% increase each year, it's not going to happen. So I'm just wondering, I mean, do you feel that we should go back to where we're having these 4% bumps every other year or every third year or fourth year? Or do you agree that it's better to just have a smooth increase where we're having, as we're having now? And I think that's been an accomplishment of this budget committee.
Well, I agree with just about everything you've said, although I would correct, I mean, I've been, for the past 5 or 6 years, I've been to a lot of town meetings, so it's not as if I haven't paid attention. But you talk about the pension fund. I agree. A couple of years ago, while the state was lowering its discount rate, the rate of return it assumes, from 7.5% to 7%, which caused a huge problem, but improved our status as funding, because we had to resolve the issue. Tiverton went the other way. We went from 7% to 7.5%. We should be putting more into our pension fund. Put it in the budget, or the road work. We need a lot of road work. Or if you're coming here in a parking lot, it's like a minefield. Put it in the budget. That's not in the budget. What's in the budget is an unassigned fund, which doesn't address any of those problems. Now, as far as whether people will be outraged in a year or two because taxes go up, if I'm reading this page I-9 correctly, it was 3.4%, 10.7%, 4.3%, 11.7%, 6.5%, 11%. So at that time, taxes had already been going up quite a bit. So will people be outraged if taxes go up in a couple of years? I don't know. If we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years of 0%, 5%, 10% might not outrage people. Maybe I would think they would realize, look, I've been getting a really good deal these past few years. We've bent the cost curve back down to where it would have been at a regular rate of increase.
Well, I'd have to differ, because to me, when we had that one increase that was like 8%, I think it was when the school bonds went through, I mean, I went out and started getting ready to run for office. I was outraged. But we've seen a difference now. We have a school committee now that's taking these surpluses. And, you know, once we build these surpluses, for instance, if we need an ambulance, a new ambulance, we could draw from that surplus and buy the ambulance rather than making 5 payments at whatever, I think it's like almost 6% interest we're paying. We could buy that ambulance cash. And that was the idea of creating these accounts that put money away to smooth that increase.
Right.
So
create those accounts.
They're in the
I haven't
budget.
taken out of any of those accounts. I took out of an unassigned account.
Well, you don't understand. What I'm trying to say is the surplus, besides the fact that it does make the town look better in bonding, because you're going to attract more prospective buyers of those bonds. Let's face it, you know, I mean, if I'm going to invest into something, like anybody else, you're going to look at the condition of that town.
Right, but that doesn't just include the town. I mean, if I'm investing in Tiverton, basically what are you investing in? You're investing in the town, the government's ability to take money away from the people, which improves if the people have lower taxes and are moving in, if the population is growing, if people have more money, the property values are going up because the taxes have been low and the town's run well. So that is more, if I were investing in a town, that would be more my consideration than whether they're able to overtax every year so that they keep building up an
So
unassigned
you
fund.
think when an investor is seeing that we've had these large spikes and that our schools are falling apart, and they know, oh, I've said enough. I think I made my point.
Thanks.
Mr. Leonard?
Good evening. Good evening. Cecil Leonard, Neck Road, former town treasurer, former town council member. As to a couple points, technically speaking, the town does not have a bond rating. The rating agencies only issue a rating when a bond is about to be floated. You can use the past bond rating as a guide, but technically there is no current bond rating. As to the benefits of building a reserve fund, the first one and the most tangible one is that the bond raters do use about 15%. And you have to be cautious because the agencies, Moody, S&P, and Fitch, who produce bond ratings, get very careful about revealing their exact process. But let's accept them for their word, and they put a weight of 15% on reserve. Well, earlier it was somewhat, the 15% was dismissed as, well, that's not a big deal. Well, it is a big deal. And if you don't believe me, imagine your paycheck in the next pay period being reduced 15%. I don't know about anybody else in the room, but a 15% reduction in my paycheck would really, really get my attention. So 15% is not inconsiderably. Next, the long-term benefits of building up, and I would like to see a lot more than 3.5%. The long-term benefits is that we will eventually be able to have a capital reserve fund so that when we go buy a new dump truck or a snow plow, instead of going out and paying the interest rates that we have to borrow the money, we'll be able to self-finance. And that's a very tangible result of building this fund up. Now, the problem is that in today's instant gratification society, nobody wants to wait. You know, we want instant results. But if you look at it from a financial standpoint, if you can build that fund up, you're going to get definite, sound reductions, cost avoidance, if you will, and you can't get away from that. I would like to see a couple steps. First, I would like to see anything above the charter mandated reserve put into a special reserve account, which can be done by council resolution, that money only goes in, and the council with public input could list what that fund could be used for. Beyond that intermediate step, what I'd like to see is the charter 3% increased in steps over a multi-year period to where we get to the 5. Actually, I would prefer around 8%. So from a standpoint of somebody that works with the numbers, that's what I would like to see. Thank you.
Can I ask you a question? And
Certainly.
one of my problems with a lot of this stuff is you see a lot of terms that are used interchangeably. So when you say 15% of the attention is given to reserves, that jives with the 15% that the treasurer's letter says is a review of general fund balances.
Right.
Now, will the rating agencies look at that year over year, or do they look at the end of the year, you've got a big reserve fund left over because there was a surplus, say? I mean, is all that 15% the amount that you dedicated have to have in your account every year?
keep in mind that the rating agencies are very conservative. And after the 2009 collapse, when they got caught with their pants down around their ankles, giving AAA ratings to junk bonds, in essence of mortgage financing, they're even more conservative. So they would look at it as a steady 15% year after year. They would like it even better if it was 15%, 18%, 20%, where they could see an upward moving or line to the right, to where they have a feeling that there's really control. And in discussions, not just with Tiverton, but in other worlds, when you discuss with the finance people, they like to see steady, predictable results. There's nothing that a banker likes to see better is predictability, and nothing they like worse than surprises. Don't ever surprise your banker, because then they panic and they call the loan.
Well, do you think it would worry them? So, I mean, I agree. I think there ought to be a section added to 310 in the charter saying anything above this amount requires at least another referendum or something, so that there's some protection. Do you think the ratings agencies would be concerned that this is just an unassigned fund? So next year, the taxpayers could say, no, I want 0%, or a contract to negotiation could require a lot of money that comes out of the unassigned funds. I mean, do you think that would concern the investing agencies?
My speculation would be that I don't know that I'd use the word concern, but they would not like that. And again, keep in mind that the rating agencies do not share a whole lot of information. It's sort of like they
secret
put
sauce.
everything into the black box and shake it up, and they say, here it is. And if you don't like it, since it's only 3 of them, it's amazing how close they come out. And of course, they never, ever talk to one another.
Yeah.
Never.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. And if we all clap our hands, Tinkerbell may come to life. So you have to be a little cautious about making real concrete statements about how they come up with their numbers.
Right. But they'd probably, I mean, if, say, we had a charter rule that increased it incrementally for a few years to get up to 8%, and it were all in dedicated funds that really cannot be touched year to year, that would be ideal.
Yes.
Rather than $800,000 just floating in an unassigned.
Yes,
Yeah.
without a doubt, because it would take an act of the voting public to change that. The fact
exactly.
that the voters had incorporated it would be viewed positively, and then it would be a defined set of actions to get that to come out of there. And yes.
What they also would like to see is what we're doing right now, is putting away the 3.5% consistently.
Yeah.
And
It's better
if they
than
look at
nothing.
that and all of a sudden we have a drop to 0, there's going to be some questions on why.
Keep in mind that upward moving line to
Absolutely.
the right makes them comfortable.
That's the benefit.
Yep.
That's the benefit.
Thank you.
Jerry Larkin, Stony Hollow Road. Mr. Katz, when you opened your comments, you said that Tiverton hasn't grown, so that the budget shouldn't really be growing, which would sort of beg the question, well, then the petition should really be reducing the budget, but that's not what it's about. It's not about gas stations or the town administrator or really anything other than 3% versus 3.5%. So I guess the question is, what is the right number? And I guess the benefit that I would see of 3.5% is sort of a common sense one, which is that if you have money in the bank, you have money in the bank that can be used for unexpected issues. So if it's 3% by the charter, you're saying it should be just 3% rather than 3.5%, even though prior councils, I think wisely, thought that the surplus should be increased. You also alluded to the fact that if the charter were changed, you would advocate a 5% surplus. So really, a little bit more than or a lot more than what we have. So is that really your position, that it's should be 3% because that's what the charter says? And if the charter were changed in a way that said it should be 5% or 10% or 15%, recognizing that that actually would be a benefit to the town in the sense that they would have that money in reserve, you would go along with that. That 5% would be a reasonable number if it were a charter number where it was protected from being used for reasons that the charter does not condone.
Right, well, my position...
So let me clarify the question.
Okay.
Would you advocate a 5% surplus if the charter said it should be 5% and that money is, got very strict guidelines around it?
Well, I mean, depending on the circumstances, frankly, if I had to make something up and advocate for something that I had written, I'd probably suggest having dedicated funds for things like capital improvements and that sort of thing, that when they reached a surplus, that went into a general fund that couldn't be touched to grow that. So I'd almost have a waterfall effect of as there were surpluses to grow the fund. What the number might be, as I said, it looks like the 7 to 8% is a reasonable amount for a town to put aside. What concerns me is we're not. I mean, there's a difference between putting something in your bank account, putting it in a 401k, putting in your cash drawer. I mean, all of them technically could be spending, but you have different access to all of them. So that's my major concern here.
So if the charter said 7% and the budget came in and the budget had a 7% surplus, you would be fine with that?
Yeah, I mean, in the circumstances, I might advocate for some savings somewhere or not, but it's in a hypothetical question. If that were the dedicated amount that we had decided we were going to put aside as a restricted rainy day fund, also for the purposes of keeping our credit rating up, that would be
7% or whatever number.
That would be reasonable. I mean, I don't know how much time I'd have to
So
actively pound the street.
the adoption of the policy by the prior council that we should actually be shooting for 5% gradually, you don't really think that that's substantial enough to say we should keep this 3.5% now rather than reduce the tax rate? That you would really need a charter change to say go to 3.5% or 5%
Well,
or
yeah,
7%.
there would be protections for the taxpayers then. I mean, you and I can speculate right now that we should put this money in there, and then next year, the year after, we'll have a charter change that'll make it untouchable. But until that happens, it's just out there in this unassigned fund, which, as we discussed with Mr. Leonard, is not the ideal circumstance, even for the credit ratings.
So then since you want the money then actually allocated to specific uses, would you say, okay, let's keep the unreserved fund at 3%, and let's take that 5 or 0.5% and do something else with it? Because there's lots of things that we could do around the town, such as pave parking lots, address stormwater, those types of things, rather than keeping rather than just saying we're going to reduce the levy.
I would always rather save and pay for something than borrow and let.
Well, we could take that 0.5% and pay for something now. I mean, there's plenty of things that we could do.
Right, but that's not what's in the budget.
Correct,
Right.
but leaving aside what the budget is, would you advocate that?
Advocate what?
Taking that 0.5% and rather than leaving it in the unrestricted fund, using it for other good purposes to improve the town?
Over time, given the circumstances.
You would? Okay, great, thank you.
I mean, people have mentioned Mr. Coulter, and that was, when he was calling for that larger fund reserve, that was, I'm pretty sure what he was referring to was a dedicated fund for purposes, can't be touched except for the dedicated purpose that we
Right.
all agreed to in the
But
docket.
until the charter restrictions were in there, you would not want to go to that number?
Not in an unassigned fund.
Okay.
Okay, Laura Epke, Neck Road, as myself, not member of the Budget Committee. First, I just want to clarify something that I've heard a couple of times. The unreserved general fund, it is not there to be dipped into. The unreserved general fund, whether it be at 3% or 3.5%, is separate from the monies that we, the town, appropriate for the municipal government to spend and the school government to spend. Is that understood by everyone? We appropriate monies from the general fund, a dollar amount. They cannot spend more than that. So the inference that they dipped into the general fund to buy the gas station is a complete falsehood.
I would disagree.
What do,
Well, for example, you use the gas station, over $400,000. It had to pass through the town. It didn't come from the taxpayers, but it was used above and beyond. And the charter clearly gives the town council,
it was a grant given for that
right, but
specific purpose.
it's still appropriated. Any revenue that
No,
comes
it
into
is
town
not.
has to be appropriated to a
It
purpose.
is not. It is not. The monies that are appropriated are the monies that you vote on at the financial town referendum. It's the proposal and the petition that you just had signed.
The town charter says that any major or special appropriation other than those in the annual budget, what we're talking about now, for an amount in excess of $500,000, must be,
That is
must go through the
for
budgeting process.
If the town proposes to expend $500,000 or more on any single item, the townspeople
Right.
must approve it.
Right, but that's up to $500,000. Amounts less than that are not protected by that.
It's in the budget.
No, but this is a note above and beyond the budget.
I'm not going to argue the point. I would ask, if I can, Mrs. Mello, the solicitor, I know in years past, we've always had resolutions when we pull money out of the general fund. Is that a requirement, or is that just something that we did as tradition?
What happened is, I believe in the past, when you had a financial town meeting, those resolutions were mandated. You have a whole new system now. So by going to the, the all-day referendum, the way we're setting it up now is the new way of doing it. But it's not required anymore because it's not an FTM.
Well, I guess my comeback would be that, as it stands right now, that general surplus withdrawal is a line item in the revenue budget. It is withdrawing from the general fund surplus. It's
Right, that's what the
$600,000.
proposal says.
Right, so it's a line item in the revenue budget. That revenue budget, if the Budget Committee Resolution Number 1 is approved, that means that whatever revenue budget and expense budget goes with whichever proposal is approved,
Right.
is then the budget for the general fund for the fiscal year. So what I'm saying is if that
Passes.
resolution doesn't pass, and Mr. Katz's proposal is approved, where is the $600,000 going to come from?
If Mr. Katz's proposal is approved, it will come from the unassigned surplus.
Just by inference?
But by the way,
Because
It's
no
a
one is
ballot
voting
It's in
on,
my petition.
no one is voting
a
on
ballot.
pulling that $600,000 from the general fund reserves.
Yeah, there. It's in the petition to do that as a withdrawal.
Right, it's a revenue line item, but no one is specifically voting on pulling 600,000.
Well, no, the charter says that whichever petition wins.
gets the most votes.
Gets the most votes. The supporting documentation, which I've supplied with that withdrawal, is what is applied to the budget.
Right, but that goes,
I'm missing what you're,
you need a specific, in my opinion, you need a specific vote to withdraw monies from the general fund. Because when we vote on that ballot proposal, we are voting solely on appropriations. We are not voting on line items. We're voting on a bottom line appropriation for the school, a bottom line appropriation for the municipal. The Budget Committee Resolution Number 1, if it's approved, will set the line items within the expense and revenue budgets to be the budget for the general fund for the following year. So you're just kind of voting on it. It's implied that you're voting on it, but there's nothing that I'm going to check off and say, I want to withdraw $600,000.
understood.
You got it?
Got it.
Okay.
Got it.
But do you mean in the future? Or within this?
What's in that budget?
Because it's in the proposal.
It's in a-
It's not on the ballot. It's in the
Right,
proposal.
all we're voting on are
Is the budget.
appropriations. We're not voting on a budget. We are voting on appropriations. We have a separate resolution that the Budget Committee put together to try and resolve this issue. But if that is not approved, we are not anywhere indicating where that $600,000 is going to come from.
Well, I guess in that sense, you're right. It's implied that's where it's
Yes.
going to come from.
So I guess, I mean, there would be no other recourse. I'll leave it at that. I just would,
Yeah.
you know, that's my argument for that. My next question, if I haven't taken too much time. I pointed out, when I went through the docket, on page I-8 and I-9, and it does bother me now, speaking as an individual, that from that May 2008 financial town meeting, there is much talk about how our taxes went up because the school bonds came on the books. There is very little remembrance of the loss of revenue in that year, and that we had pulled $900,000 out of the general fund the year prior to that, and we were left with a $900,000 hole. I see ourselves in the position, if we pull $600,000 from the general fund with this petition, we will start the year next year. When we go to work on the budget in the following year, we're going to be starting with a $600,000 hole in the revenue, plus however many hundreds of thousands of dollars are coming on the books for the library bond. So I would ask Mr. Katz, next year, when we do not have a $600,000 revenue line item, where is that $600,000 going to come from? What would you cut in next year's budget to make up for that $600,000?
I don't know. Did state aid go up? Did the town grow? Did energy prices go down or up?
This is a year from now.
I can't project what would have to be cut a year from now when we don't know what's going to happen over the next year.
But we will need to find $600,000.
Not necessarily.
No?
No.
We can tax ourselves to
No.
make up the difference.
We don't know what the budget's going to have to be next year. I mean, it would be like if last year the taxes had been even higher and there were another $500,000 in there, and we took that out last year, saying, what will you cut next year? Maybe nothing. If the town is run smoothly, like Moody's wants it to be, well-managed, then there shouldn't have to be an increase above and beyond. And in essence, what you're saying is, we're going to increase taxes next year, so we're going to tax you this year in order to cover that now. I just disagree with the whole characterization of
I
it.
understand you have a different philosophical and ideological bent than I. I am looking at numbers. I see a revenue line item for next fiscal year of $600,000. I want to know where that $600,000 is going to come from the year after that.
No, you're imagining this line item next year. We don't know what next year is going to be. I mean, we know this year that there's $800,000 more than we have to have in there. We know, that's what we know. That's the math, that's the number that's in front of us. We don't know what's going to happen next year.
Excuse me, Mr. Burke, you've been waiting, and then you will be Mr. Karen.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Mike Burke, 67 Durfee Road. Also speaking on behalf of the Tiverton Democratic Town Committee. I want to point out that at our meeting last night, our committee decided that we needed to support the good work of the Budget Committee, the Council, the School Committee, and others for the budget that they put forward that does have the lowest tax levy increase since the time I've been here, and certainly others longer. I want to point out, too, that all of those bodies are bipartisan bodies, multi-partisan bodies, actually.
Nonpartisan.
I'm talking, you're not.
I'm sorry, excuse me.
Thank you. Multi-partisan bodies, made up of folks who have very different fiscal perspectives, political perspectives. but they all came together for the good of the town. I have one question then, since this is a hearing and not a question and answer period, the rest of my comments will be statements, and I'm not looking for any rebuttal, nor would I ask anybody to give any. Mr. Katz, you gave an opinion earlier about the effect of having the additional money in the unreserved general fund and what effect that might have to the positive or negative of the town when Mr. Mantell asked you the question. I just would like to know what your credentials are as a financial professional.
Well,
Do you have credentials as a financial professional?
looking at budgets and policies it's what I do for a living.
Do you have credentials?
Looking at budgets is what I do for a living.
That's not, no, I look at budgets too, but I don't have credentials as a financial professional. Do you have credentials as a financial professional?
I have credentials to have researched what the data
Do you have a
shows for the rest of
degree?
Rhode Island.
Do you have a degree in finances?
Yeah, we're
Okay,
getting,
but we need
No,
to get on
no,
to
I'm
a
sorry.
question,
I'm
sir.
asking a question. It's a simple question. Do you have any degree that's related to finance? Excuse me.
All right, Mr. Katz isn't answering, so please move on,
Okay.
Mr. Burke.
Point of this is what you described is your personal opinion. It's not a professional opinion because you do not have a professional background. Neither do I. So my
I would argue a
opinions-
professional is
excuse
somebody
me,
who gets paid to do
excuse me,
something, and I get paid to do
excuse me.
this. So I'm a professional. Somebody
Excuse
pays
me.
me. It's my career.
Madam Clerk?
Let him get to the end of what he's
Thank
going to
you.
say, and then please respond to
No, no, Madam Clerk. I'm not looking for a response.
That was a question, so he was trying
He
to
gave a
respond
question.
to his question.
He answered the question.
Okay.
From here on out, I'm not looking for a response, and I'm
Okay.
not expecting one. Okay? So, what I give you from me are my personal perspectives, although I will take some perspectives from some professionals. So there's been a lot of discussion about the effect of having a strong fund balance. Our town treasurer, in her letter, gives some very specific information as to why this is important. I won't read the whole thing. For example, she says, growing this fund beyond minimum levels, because the charter is that. It's a minimum level of 3%. It's not a maximum level. Growing this fund beyond minimum levels only strengthens the town's financial condition. Later on, however, Moody's specifically cited in their last report that Tiverton had in the past drawn down its reserve balances and noted that our ability to restore structural balance and augment our reserves is and will remain an important rating factor for future borrowing. So that comes from a professional in the field. I do want to be clear. I have a very fundamental difference in philosophy of government than what Mr. Katz has. I believe that good government requires us to make sure that there are quality town services, quality public educational services for all taxpayers, and that we use those dollars wisely. From my perspective, this budget committee, this council, this school committee, and over the past several years the same, have done just that. And having a 3.5% unreserved general fund as a minimum is good policy. And I don't say that lightly because, as many know, I don't often agree with Mr. Coulters and Mr. Nelson, who will put that forward. I also want to talk about a couple pieces of what were put out there as facts that are not necessarily facts. Mr. Mantell gave some percentages of student decreases over time, which when you added up, came out to about 15%. The high point of our student population was 2,200. We're now at 1,900. That's about a 9% difference. We had a high of about 200 teachers. We're now at about 180. That's about a 10% difference. So in terms of some of the control items that are somewhat controllable, the school committee and the school superintendent have done a good job with that. They've also done a good job of, and I feel like I'm beating a dead horse with this because many of us say this every year, they and the council and the budget committee have done a good job of finding ways to control areas that otherwise would have been out of control, such as the way that they handle healthcare, such as the way they handle the purchasing of heating oil, as two examples. And the letter you have here, Mr. Katz, by talking about your opinion that it was not a wise move to go out and purchase the gas station using money that was available that was outside of our taxpayers' local tax dollars. It just befuddles me that you're basically damning the council for making every effort to go find other sources of funding. So if some foundation in some future year wants to give us $100,000 for, I don't know, a new park, I guess we should turn that down because it wasn't in the budget. So in closing, Mr. Souza had talked about whether or not we want this roller coaster effect and how we've tried to stabilize things. Before I moved here, I lived in Massachusetts and I had the opportunity to be the chairman of my condo association. We had about somewhere around 1,000 units, 200 acres or so, tennis courts, swimming pool, and lots of roads and some other amenities. But the previous boards that we had decided they didn't want to raise the condo fees for many years, which meant all those amenities went downhill and became, in some respects, decrepit. So when I became chair, one of the tough choices we had to make was to increase our condo fees, our taxes, by about 20%. And yes, there were a lot of people that was hard to do. But folks really did understand that it was done because we had to. And after that, it stabilized because we took hold of the problem, took the emergency measures needed to fix that problem, and then over time they were able to stabilize the condo fees, their taxes. And that's what I see has happened here. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jeff Karen from Nanaquacket Road, and I have a lot of notes here that I've been taking. However, I think it's important, I'm going to try to speak a little bit on the fly about it. I think it's important to understand some of the parameters, and I'm speaking this to the people in the audience, but also the people on the camera and the people on the stage, that we're talking about the amount of money that's in excess of 3% of our operating budget in the general fund. And to what Mr. Katz said earlier, if the general fund number, if the number in the charter was 5%, we'd all be talking about anything over 5% right now. It's a number. The implication, though, and the significance is that that amount of money that's over that number, okay, while it can't be spent directly, it moves forward to the next year as an amount of money. That's just sitting there and is ripe to be spent. Now, I just heard about a roller coaster from Mr. Burke, and I've heard, and I'm going to have a little bit of proof about this in a few minutes with a bunch of statements that were made tonight. But in my opinion, if we let this general fund build up, we are beginning the ride up the roller coaster. And the reason I say that is, well, it sounds nice to build the general fund up. The problem is that it's over the 3%. And if you look back in history to what Ms. Epke was speaking about the 2008 year, what happened there, and to my memory, is, and I was at the time the vice chairman of the budget committee, yes, I was vice chairman in '08. What happened there was for 2 or 3 years in a row, we had a large surplus, okay, in the general fund over the 3%. And we started pulling that money out and letting the budgets grow. And we were offsetting the tax levy and letting the budgets grow at a high percentage, and we were offsetting the tax levy with this money from the general fund. And it is true that when that money ran out, we had a problem. I won't deny that, because we had let the budgets grow. However, the real problem essentially was having that large unreserved amount there in the first place that allowed that to happen and to let the budgets grow. Now, one might say, well, is this really going to happen? Well, I sat here tonight and I heard 3 different people say, essentially allude to the fact that it will happen. I heard Mr. Souza say that we could buy an ambulance with this money, perhaps in a future year. That's spending this money. I grant you it would be through an appropriation, but it would be spent. So we're being taxed now, but we're going to spend it later, okay? It's not going to sit there and help the bond rating and whatnot. I heard Ms. DiMadeira say, what are we going to do next year? We're going to have to come up with this money next year. So there is, again, we're going to apparently spend this money the following year or in some future year. And that's that. And then I also heard from Ms. Epke a comment, and I made a note of it. I don't specifically recall what it was offhand, but I heard her say the same thing about a problem creeping up, I believe. So that essentially proves that there's an intent here, at least among some audience people and a couple of committee members, that this money will accumulate and be there to spend on something, okay? The problem is when we do that, we grow budgets, and then we offset with this unreserved amount. And when we do that, we have the crash that we had in '08. The way to take care of this problem is to nip it in the bud, okay, and not let this fund accumulate a whole lot over 3%. If we want to do that, then by all means, we change the charter and we make it 5%, and then fine, we can do 5%. But to let it accumulate unreserved like this could possibly lead to a 6% budget increase with only a 3% tax levy increase. And then the year after that is when things crash. So my conclusion would be that the beginning of, if we allow this fund to build, we're starting to go up that roller coaster ride. Someday, we heard tonight, it will be spent. And when that happens, the budgets grow, and then we have the problem. So I would advocate to support the petition of Mr. Katz, and to not let this fund grow in an unreserved fashion. And if it is the goal to have this policy, let's set it in stone, let's make it a charter thing, and let's set it in stone, and let's make it happen, and then we don't have the risk. We get the benefit, apparently, if there is a benefit of this credit rating stuff. If there is, we get the benefit, but we get it properly, and we get it with a limitation and a restriction, instead of having a bucket of money there that would be available for spending in that way. And I just think it's important that, because I think that's really what's at stake here. And if I look at who's speaking on these different topics, it's interesting to me that some people who are perhaps of a fiscal conservative view don't want to let this money accumulate, and perhaps others who are for letting this money accumulate are those who historically like to see the money get spent on things. And in closing, I just want to say that for all the people who make this decision on the vote on the 20th of May, essentially it comes down to, if it comes down to for a given taxpayer $100, do you want that money in the town's bank account, or do you want that money in your bank account? And that really, I think, is going to be the fundamental crux of this vote. Do you want the money in the town's bank account, or do you want the money in your bank account? Thank you.
I don't really have any questions either, just a few statements for the hearing. First of all, I wanted to just, I'm hearing a lot about they did this, they doubled the tax rate, they want to spend. The people in Tiverton spend our money. The people in Tiverton vote on every single budget. It's the people who, in 2008, 9, 10, 11, 12, and this year, decide what level of spending they want. They decide what level of services they want. It's not me. It's not the 50 people sitting in this room. It's the people that show up at the hearing collectively. So when we're pointing to individuals and saying they want to spend, they're going to spend, it's collectively. We decide. So that always kind of bothers me. The other thing is, while I am an accounting and finance professional, I couldn't have said it any better than Mr. Leonard about the benefits that you do get from having an unreserved general fund. The Government Finance Officers Organization, which is sort of the national organization of finance professionals, which are town administrators essentially from across the country, they recommend 15%, as did our treasurer when she mentioned that, but they recommend a minimum of 5. Our own state recommends a minimum of 5 at the state level for their reserve. And as far as, there's many benefits. One of them, several people have talked about, and that is being able to use it for capital reserves. Our new town administrator writes, communities that follow a formal plan for saving unrestricted funds for capital investments enjoy significantly better long-term health than those that attempt to finance major spending through annual operating funds or long-term debt. So that absolutely is one benefit that will accrue to us. The other thing is people have said, well, what do Moody's say? We don't know what they're going to say. Well, we do know what they were going to say. I have an email from 2007 when we were going to go out to bond that came from Moody's to our then town treasurer, Jim Amarantes. And they said at the time we had a reserve of $3.7 million. Mr. Katz's petition would take it down to 1.8. This was 3.7. And they said, management expects balanced operations, and at a minimum, which had a reduced fund balance appropriation of $800,000. While the town's law requires the town maintain a minimum of 3% of the current year's operating budget, it aims, because at the time this is what they aimed for, to maintain reserves approximating 6% of the unreserved general fund. That may provide the town with additional financial flexibility. Going forward, the town's ability to restore structural balance and augment reserves to levels consistent with the current rating category will remain an important rating factor. So they're telling us that. But again, I don't think people should get all, that's only one aspect of having a general fund reserve. And again, I won't belabor it because I think Mr. Leonard did a really good job. And I agree with Joe. I think Mr. Susan made an excellent point. We had a lot of ups and downs and jumps, and we're trying to manage our reserves. We're trying to manage those spikes, and it's really sort of, it feels good in the short term. Let's not have a 0% increase, but we will. Mrs. DiMedeiros is right. Laura's right. We will have to deal with it next year, and you're creating a $600,000 structural deficit. We will have to deal with it on top of the fact that we're going to have a new bond, and we'll have to deal with it. Now, maybe we're just going to hope that it'll all be all right. But it's a 1.29% increase, and it's a very we're subjecting ourselves to a lot of risk to make ourselves, in my opinion only, feel good this year. And I would really hope that the townspeople follow the financial advice that we've gotten from the financial professionals, not only in, our own town, which would be our treasurer and our town administrator, but the financial professionals in other areas. Even Paul Dansereau, our auditor for the last 2 years in a row, has commended us for building up our reserves. So I would hope that we give some credence to that and the hard work that the Budget Committee did to keep this to a 1.29% increase. I think that can't be said enough. That I know that was a lot of hard work, and I thank them for that.
I'm sorry, Mrs. Sodell, but Mr. Rudy? Okay, go ahead.
Madeline Odell from Warren Avenue. I'm on the Budget Committee, and of course, I support the Budget Committee's budget. We work very hard to get it down. I think, though, that Mr. Katz may have put this budget in because times are not good in the state, in the country, in the town. And I think that's probably one of the things that people are talking about, 15% reserve. It's not going to happen in this economy. So we do the best we can with what we have, and I think that we tried our best, the Budget Committee. But I can understand the perspective that Mr. Katz is working on, that there are a lot of people that do have problems paying extra taxes. And hopefully, I think if we can keep it low every year, then it's good. I'm happy with that. So, what can I say? Thank you.
Hello, James Aruda, East Road. First, I think I'll start with, there was a gentleman earlier speaking that when he was on the Budget Committee, they would use general fund and the budgets kept growing. Far as I know, since I've been on town council and since some of you have been on the Budget Committee, it seems that the budgets have been more under control and stopped growing probably since some people have left. So with that said, Mr. Katz, would you consider yourself a proactive person or a reactive person?
I'll need you to define what you mean.
Proactive or reactive?
Well, when I see a problem, I proactively try to fix it, and when I see something come at me, I react. So I don't know what you mean.
Basically, what I'm going to get to the point is, my opinion, your approach is one of reactionary approach. And multiple times, people have brought up, well, what will we do next year, what will we do next year? I've heard a few times, I don't know what the budget will be next year. Okay, fine. But Mr. Souza made the point, well, we could possibly use the money to buy an ambulance. Well, or a DPW truck. We would probably know if a 25-year-old truck might need to be replaced soon or not. So what we've done in the council is we have tried to proactively plan out for capital expenditures for what these unreserved funds could be used for. So we don't have to borrow the money to buy these things. That's what we've been actually trying to do.
Well,
and I believe that's what Mr. Souza is actually trying to, his point was trying to come across. Now, that's one thing. Now, you also mentioned that voting for a petition would be a great benefit for the town because it puts money back in people's pockets. That might be true. I would argue the fact that maybe if possibly you or some of the people who had this idea come to us in January when we were building the budget, we probably could have used this money to put more money into paving, to pave some of these roads, to put more money into some capital expenditures that we do need, paving this parking lot for the school, paving, I don't know how many roads we need to pave, buying a few other trucks that we had to scrap money together out of the existing budget to try to come up with a utility truck and a new truck for maintenance. So we basically drained this budget down to 1.5% increase and still tried to come up with things that we didn't have. And that was all with trying not to use the unreserved general fund. And it was our intent not to use any this year at all, because we know next year the library bond is going to be coming due. And there will be a significant tax increase if we take this money out of this budget this year. So once again, what do we do next year? What do we do the year after that? We have to have some kind of a plan going forward so we can control these tax increases, so we don't go back to the seesaw effect that we had many years ago, that I think the gentleman said that he was a part of.
So I can respond now. I would be proactive in a sense, perhaps more proactive. I would have maybe suggested, if we know we're going to have expenditures, let's have a dedicated fund for that, and then we can put it in there rather than just put it in, because you could foresee that you're going to want to do that. You would create that fund to put the money in. But it occurs to me from what you just said, so essentially you're validating Mr. Karen's thesis, is that we're putting this money in there now so that we can increase the budget next year without the tax increase, right?
No.
But we're going to have bonds and
I'm not sure how
stuff.
I'm not sure how one-time expense increases the budget.
Well, you,
following year. It's a one-time
yeah,
expense.
you put it in the budget, and then the next year, your budget, that's your baseline. The next year, your budget goes up by that same,
Well, if
that's
we're,
where you
if
start
we're
out.
buying something to replace something, something comes out, that new thing goes in.
It's in the reserve.
So you're suggesting that next year you would, in the budget would be.
I'm not suggesting anything.
Okay, so you don't want, you like me, you don't want to predict the future then?
We already did. We put a plan together. We sat together democratically and put a plan together with the budget committee, with ourselves. And I know that you are an advocate of democratic process, but I don't really see you participating in it very much.
Well, actually, I do participate quite a bit.
Not with us, you didn't.
Yeah, well, you know, it's a
Why
it's
not?
a hostile environment there.
How is it hostile? If anyone knows me, I've only been on the town council for 2 years, well, just under 2 years now, is I'm a person who has listened.
Mhm.
Anyone who has called my phone, I have listened to them. Anyone. And I have taken what they have to say, and there are things I have acted on, and there's things I haven't. So making assumptions about me or how I would react to you is a little juvenile.
Well, I didn't say you. I mean, just.
You inferred me.
Well, on the one hand, I did go to, but, well, this is, all right, I'll refrain.
Well, that's all I wanted to say, and I really hope that the people in Tiverton can see the hard work that we put in, and we are the people that they elected to put this budget together, and I really hope they can trust our decisions. Thank you.
Mr. Pelletier. Okay, Mr. Karen, could you give me a minute, please? Mr. Pelletier hasn't spoken yet, and he was. Oh.
My name is Brett Pelletier. I'm on the Tiverton Town Council, and I live somewhere on Evans Avenue. I guess what I want to say is that this town council, for the first time since I've been on it, and this is the fourth budget cycle I've been part of, has started to have a conversation. And this is just more for information for anyone who isn't glued to our meetings, especially the ones we had on Saturday mornings. The first time we've had a conversation about potential utility of the unreserved general fund in the future. We had it at our joint workshop with the budget committee. We talked about it in one of our first serious meetings with the new town administrator, and we've talked about it one other time since then. And our idea is whether or not we can, because we know it's possible from other communities who've done it in Rhode Island, to essentially cut the unreserved general fund into tranches and continue to maintain the unreserved general fund as it is today at our 3% mandatory limit, but then take a look at our alternatives for using or somehow putting that capital towards a better use. There are uses. I'm trying not to get too into the nitty-gritty of all of the different things, but we are talking about that. And so I think that something you just said, Mr. Katz, just rang a bell in my head that you said something to the effect of, if it were me, I would have, put these different allocations together, or essentially cut this money up so that there are dedicated pockets in which you can put this money in to be used for capital expenditures or infrastructure improvements or something to that effect. I think I heard something like that.
Well, if I had to make up a policy and hand it to somebody, I mean,
Yeah.
I wouldn't necessarily recommend, my final work product, but
Sure.
that would be my
Sure.
initial instinct.
And I agree. That's what I think is an appropriate way to put this capital out to good use. The problem is, I am a single person that sits on a board that has only partial input on a budget, and only partial input on the day-to-day maintenance of the budget. And there are a dozen other people over here and a dozen more people over there. And it takes a long time. It's not an excuse, but I just want people to know that we are talking about this. It's a serious conversation for people who deal with this kind of stuff every day, and it's an even more serious conversation for those of us who don't. So I don't want anybody to think that it's kind of a willy-nilly, we're putting $500,000 in this pocket and we're sticking $200,000 in this pocket for someday to use on something we don't know yet. There's always that element of uncertainty that we don't want to really, I mean, anybody who lived through the financial crisis should appreciate, and was paying attention, should appreciate that uncertainty is an incredibly damning mistress, I suppose. And you really have to focus on what you can grapple with, and what you can't, you really have to focus on how best to allocate resources to figure out what we don't know is going to happen. We know something might happen. We have no idea what it is, but I think it's a hard argument to make that we want to be less prepared for that eventuality. And I think that as best we can, we need to protect the financial integrity and the, I guess my thesis is that it's one way or the other, and I think it's more prudent if we can plan to spend money at a reasonable cost of capital rather than paying out. We haven't gotten there yet. And I hope in the next 6 or 8 months we'll start talking about it a lot more. After the budget is done, we'll have a lot more time to do that. And that's all I wanted to say, is that we really are taking a hard look at this. The Budget Committee, Town Council, and the new Town Administrator, along with the Treasurer and the Clerk, and anybody that'll listen to us. So I just wanted to say that.
Mr. Karen from Nanaquacket Road. We just heard from Councilor Pelletier and many others tonight about, including Mr. Katz, on both sides of the aisle, about being wise about planning, buckets of money. And I look through the docket, and I see a line item in there, in the docket, for the revaluation. Let's save, I think it was $50,000 toward the revaluation, which we're going to have in a couple more years. And then I see a resolution that puts that into a secure reserved amount. That is planning. That's prudent, and it locks the money up and potentially locks it up. At least it tries to with the proper voting, okay? The big topic here is that we have a bunch of money without the proper resolution or buckets, and that's, I think, the fundamental issue. So I think, though, we can all agree that, there's reasons that people plan these things. I do have one other comment, and I've just got to find it quickly here, but there was a town council, maybe someone could help me. There was a town council resolution on page, sorry, I'm not, what's that? Oh, it's not in the docket, but I'll try to reiterate the language. Oh, actually, let me grab one.
If you go to the agenda, it's on the back of it.
Okay, thank you. It says here, resolved that pursuant to Section 204 of the Town Charter, the Town Council is hereby authorized to transfer ownership of Judson Street Community Center, provided that any such transfer is in the best interest of the town. In the best interest of the town. So when I read this, when I walked in tonight, I said, what does that mean? And the language I'm used to seeing there is provided that such transfer is at fair market value. That's what I'm used to seeing there. Instead, this time I see best interest of the town. And unfortunately, I had to step out while the councilors were on stage. I'm not sure why that language is there. This is a genuine question. It concerns me, that it doesn't say at fair market value. Well, would someone, if it's okay with the clerk, could someone talk to that? Because I think it's an important point, because it's worded a little differently than what we're used to.
Mr. Roderick.
I'd be more than happy to, Mr. Karen. Okay, the change in the wording is, everyone talks about fair market value. Well, fair market value is what somebody is willing to pay. It's not some fictitious number that says, ooh, that building's worth $100,000. If somebody's only willing to pay you $1, that is the fair market value. So our reading is what is in the best interest of the town, meaning that we would try to get the most money for it. We saw what happened with Old Ranger, because that went for fair market value, because that's what anybody was willing to pay, and that's the difference.
So am I to deduce then that the best interest of the town is going to get more than fair market value?
Okay, wait a minute, we need to either have Mr. Okay. All right.
It's my suggestion that we change.
Mr. Pelletier will represent the council on this response.
Thank you. So, partly because this has been a conversation that Andy Tights and I have had a number of times, and partly because I think it actually, the language as it was written actually serves to, I think it serves the opposite intent of what it was designed for. And I think any reasonable person would say that to agree to sell something at fair market value means that you'll get the best price for it. The problem I have found from experience the last 3.5 years being on the council was that there's nothing that compels the town to sell it at the highest price. And if we go through a round of whether it's a sealed bidding process or whatever it is, a regular sales marketing, there's nothing that compels the town to sell it at the highest price. And what happened more than once, if I recall, is that the council decided to do nothing at all instead of exercising a transaction that would have been less than the highest bidder, which may have been a better use for the town or a better whatever it was, and I think this language allows us to sell to what we believe is a good, here's an example. If someone comes in and says, well, I want to pay $500,000 for the Judson Street Community Center, and I want to light it on fire and have a giant bonfire, and the next bid is $200,000, but they're going to make it a private senior home or something. If we were compelled to make a decision, we would have to award it to the $500,000 at fair market, because that's the highest value. That would, in the bidding process, be at the arguable legal fair market value. And Mike, you're an attorney, I'm not, but. Whereas we could sell it to the $200,000 private senior residence bidder in this arrangement, or not at all as well. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it makes sense if the numbers are within 5% of each other. 200,000 and 500,000 doesn't make sense to me, but that's okay. So thank you for the explanation. Thank you.
What do you mean it doesn't make sense?
I guess what I'm saying is like anything else, when you go out and bid on something and you get a bunch of bids, and there's a whole bunch of bids that are competitive bids, and very often, there's judgment calls to be made, perhaps, in the selection. But sometimes you might get an outlier, but on the other hand, it might be a meritorious outlier. And in that case, it's prudent to consider it seriously. So that's fine. I appreciate the explanation. It was a genuine question. I'd never seen that language before.
Yeah,
And I say, if you had a $500,000 bid and a $200,000 bid, and you took the two, there might be a little bit of angst about that.
I think we would be in
But if it was within
violation.
5 or 10%,
I think we
and-
would be either way in violation of that resolution and outside of our authority to do so, under the old language.
Right.
Yeah. So that's why it's...
No, I understand.
Okay.
And, you know, when we're talking nickels and dimes and a good use, that makes sense.
Yeah.
When the things just diverge a lot, it
And
becomes
I'll
an
tell you
issue.
that just from the last few years of experience, things that I didn't think would happen happened, and it made me think that maybe this language is actually an impediment to transactions than it is to ensure the highest price.
Okay.
Ideally, it would ensure the highest price, but instead it has the potential to have no transaction, and then there's no benefit, and the asset continues to deteriorate.
Thank you. I
Sure.
appreciate that.
That's
Thank you.
I think that's yours.
Wait, Mrs. Driggs?
Nancy Driggs, Main Road. I just sort of want to sum up what I think, my understanding of what is going on here. In the two budgets, Mr. Katz's budget accepts all the school committee, the municipal budget. The funding is going forward as planned. The issue seems to come over this reserved, general unreserved fund. Nobody's arguing that planning shouldn't happen, but the planning should happen within the budget, that if the school wants to have money put aside for certain things, that goes into the budget, and a fund is created to make sure that the money will be there. Same with municipal. Our town has a minimum that has to be there of 3% of general operating expenses. And the reason for that minimum is if the town, it's for taxpayer accountability, basically. It's for the taxpayer to understand where money is going, because before you can dip down below that 3%, the town council has to have a 4/5 vote approving it. Therefore, the taxpayers are made aware of where this money is going. So I think what people are arguing about here, and what I got from what Cecil was saying, is sure, if the town wants to increase the amount that they're having as this fund, emergency fund, up to 5%, up to 8%, and you do it through the charter, what you're also doing along with that, which I think what Mr. Katz is addressing, along with that comes those same taxpayer accountability issues that the town council would have to have that 4/5 vote to allocate that money that is unreserved for anything before they spend it. So I think that's what the issue is. And my understanding is that the money in a reserve, in the unreserved general fund, is really taxpayer money that was taxed the year before that ended up not being needed that year. So Mr. Katz's view, as I understand it, is why not use that money to give it back to the taxpayer? It wasn't used, and it's not like you're taking away from anything. It was unnecessary money that was collected over what you need. Return it to the taxpayer, which is what his proposal does, which is what keeps the tax levy at zero. And I think it makes a lot of sense. And if the town wants to increase, they're worried about their credit worthiness, and it is a big concern, then fine, let's deal with it legally through raising the charter limits, which keeps that same accountability to taxpayer there. And that's what I think is this whole discussion is about, that people in town want to have a sense that the town is accountable to them for the monies they take from them and where those monies go. That's all.
Just briefly, a couple things that come to mind for the discussion that's been had. And I want to point out a term that Ms. Driggs just used, that we want to legally do this. There's nothing illegal in that budget document. It's a document that describes how the town, if the voters approve, will use taxpayer funding. There's nothing illegal about having an unreserved general fund above the minimum 3%. There have been a lot of what-ifs thrown out here. If we have money, extra money above that 3%, some wild town council will go out and start purchasing things willy-nilly for 100,000, 200,000, making sure they stay under that 500,000. I've lived here about 11 years now, I think, and I've talked to folks who have lived here their whole life. I can't remember, they can't remember any time that any town council, when there's been a surplus in that unreserved general fund, where they've gone and grabbed that money to purchase things willy-nilly. The only thing I remember it being used for and approved for by the voters was to reduce the tax levy in very challenging years where the tax levy was otherwise going to skyrocket. And just to bring it down to the personal level, and we all know this, we all try to put a prudent person, when they can, tries to put money away for future purchases, whether it's a car, whether it's your kid's college, whether it's perhaps moving up into a new home, new septic system. And you might plan that I'm going to start putting money away for that new septic system, but my roof starts leaking. So now I have to use that money that I put away for that new septic system, which was a priority, but the roof's more of a priority. So I have to do that. And that's what this helps us do. Nobody's trying to grab money here and there. We're trying to be prudent and responsible officials for this town.
Ruth Hollenbach, Sapowit Avenue. I just want to remind everyone that in the past, there have been many people who have suffered in this town by losing homes, and due to unexpected tax increases. It's a very uprooting situation. It's a very sad situation, and it also has kept people from moving to the town. I think the general fund should be totally separate from the budgeting, and if you plan for a roof, you must also plan for, school maintenance budget, school maintenance of the buildings. If we had planned well in all of the past years, before I was even here, the school would be maintained right now. We would have all the roads paved. So what we're dealing with is a past lack of planning for a rainy day. And now we're trying to play catch up. So it is difficult. And I understand the Budget Committee did a great job coming up with that number. I just think that what this petition is asking for is, please give us a break this year. It's been so hard for so long, and everybody's putting aside, their plans for in these difficult years. I think that's what is basically behind it, and I do agree with planning in the future in the budget for anything that's coming, like a septic tank need, road repairs, the senior center roof, anything, so Joe doesn't have to do it out of his own own time, which is nice. But I think we should keep working together and keep going forward, but we have things to make up for. Even the pensions, maybe those hadn't planned ahead for difficult years. So I'm not an expert in finances, but I do see that what a household does, like planning for a roof like I have to, that I think we should also do as a town, and that's all I want to say on that.
Okay, I think we've heard from everybody that wants to be heard, so unless there's anybody else who wants to come up very quickly, I think we're going to adjourn this meeting.
Can I just...
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Perry.
Just a closing comment on what's going on tonight. As we started 3 hours ago, or whenever it was, I explained to everyone that this was a 7-month process. These are all the backups that we have. We've spoken to every single department head. We've spoken to the town council. We've spoken to the school committee. More backup right here. I plead with you to support the budget put forward by the budget committee. It's been a lot of hard work and a lot of time put into it. The proposal for Mr. Katz is this little page that, in my opinion, was put together at a dining room table with a group of people sitting around it with no backup. This is it. Please support the budgets proposed by the Budget Committee. Thank you.
Well, I would reiterate that I'm not changing a single thing in that entire budget except one item, which is the withdrawal from the unassigned reserve fund. So I didn't have a need, in essence, to talk to every employee because I didn't touch their line items. The budget's the same budget, exactly the same, but taxes are lower. Taxes are zero for once. I would, in response to Mr. Burke's suggestion that sometimes you take money, you're planning for a roof and you have to do, or a septic and you have to do a roof. The charter provides for the town council to transfer funds within the budget as priorities change. So if you have a reserve fund and there 4/5 vote or whatever the charter prescribes, or if you need to have a fund that you add that to. But there is the ability to transfer funds. For example, I know some people on the budget committee had assumed by going back to last year's amount for the town planner, that meant they were eliminating hiring one, but apparently not. The town council is actually planning to go forward and hire a planner and transfer funds from other accounts in order to pay the full salary if somebody's hired. It is doable. So again, I didn't touch anything in the budget except the one line item, and it funds everything and saves everybody 32 cents per thousand on their taxes. Starts to turn back those huge increases we've seen over the last 12 years, 14 years, however long it's been.
Mr. Lambert, are you going to be very quick? Oh.
Are these closing comments, or?
Yeah, I think we're just about done here, Mr. Lambert. Is this something quick that you just have a statement?
Yeah.
Because I think we've covered everything we could cover. Go ahead.
What I was hoping to do, and I'm not going to do it, is I was going to try to find out after listening to Mr. Katz and to Mrs. Driggs exactly where we do differ. Because you want my opinion, Mr. Katz, you
Not really.
changed your tone during this meeting. If you read that petition and you read your letter, it's clear that you wanted the money back, period. You didn't say in the letter or the petition, and I think I'm quoting you, "Oh, I could live with 5%. You never told us that in the petition. You've indicated here after we said Mr. Donsero had suggested the 7 to 9%. You indicate you might be able to agree, depending on the circumstances, to 7 or 9%. You never said that in the letter. You never said that in the petition, and nothing in that petition provides for an increase in the reserve. Just answer one question. When Mr. Coulter and Mr. Nelson proposed raising the unreserved fund, did you object to it at that time?
I didn't object or not object. But I would also say,
Yeah, thank you very much.
I would also suggest that my tone has not changed. I want the money back because there's no reason to have it in an unassigned fund for a group of people whom I don't trust.
Okay, Jay, all right, we've had, all right, the closing statements were made. Mr. Lambert was allowed to talk because he had been waiting before to get up. That's it. We're going to adjourn the meeting.
Nancy,
I'm sorry, what?
before we adjourn, just for those who may have lasted on television, you can pick up your information at the library or town hall. The referendum is on May 20th, and the polls are open from
8 in the morning to 8 at night. We also have early voting. There'll be advertisements in the paper. It's early absentee voting on the Thursday, Friday, and Saturday prior to the May 20th FTR.
And the
Okay?
polling locations are?
The polling
And
locations,
the-
could you announce them? Thank you.
The polling locations, yes, I posted them there around the building tonight. We are also going to be having them in the newspaper. The polling locations are going to be the same as they have been in the last 3 years. It will be at the VFW for the northern sections, districts of town, at Country View for districts 303 and 305, and at Amicable Church for more the southern end of town. Any absentee early voting will be held at the town hall only. Anybody can call the town clerk's office and get all this information. It's on our website. It's